Welcome to the Bearded Finisher Podcast, your one-stop show for all things finishing and coatings. Your host, Zach, and a variety of industry experts will guide you through the art of perfecting your finishing and business game. From seasoned pros to fresh faces, get ready for tips, tricks, and trends to elevate your knowledge and business to the next level.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Bearded Finisher Podcast. Today, we're going to geek out a little bit about on the software side. We've got Chris Riker with My Paint Buckets, and he has some amazing software that you guys need to check out. What's going on, Chris?
Hey, Zach, thanks for having me, man. And loving the beard. I wish I could do a beard. I substitute beard for hair, as you can see.
I mean, we do the opposite. I can't do the top, but I can do the beard. I actually just, maybe a month now, I always wore hats because it's, this area just had no hair. And finally, my wife kept saying, no. She went out of town, and I just said, screw it. Had the barber shave it all the way down. And she came back, and she goes, I like it. I'm like, yes.
Win.
Now I don't have to worry about it anymore. Be so self-conscious about having a big giant bald spot up there. So let's jump in. Let's just kind of share your story, how you found yourself into the painting business, and then we'll kind of jump into My Paint Buckets.
Sure. Yeah. So my path to paint has been very non-traditional. So I started in the military. So I spent 20 years in the Air Force. Now the Space Force was my AFSC, or my job in the military. So 20 years doing a combination of various fun activities, missile warning, missile defense. Spent a lot of time in the Middle East doing a different set of missions there. And so like most, I retired. And when I stepped out of the military, I went into defense contracting out here in Florida. And so what I started to find after about a year of doing that, I was like, man, this is it's good. It's a lot of fun, work with a lot of cool toys, but it's the same stuff I've been doing for 20 years. And so I started harassing my wife. I was like, hey, what does your dad do? He's never really understood what he did. And a lot of it was, we moved back home, and she's like, he owns a paint company or something. I was like, I was like, all right, that's interesting. Like he's, seems to be doing great for himself. And so I started to talk to him. I was like, hey, Pop, what do you do? Like, and he was always kind of cryptic about it. He's like, we do paint. I was like, what does that mean? Like, cause I never see paint on him. Well, I rephrase that, not all the time. And so long story short, I found out he was doing new residential construction, doing painting for, a lot of the national home builders. So think, Ryan Homes, Pulte Homes, a lot of them have now been engulfed by some of the larger builders now. So I talked to my wife. I was like, hey, I think I want to do something different. Like I want to start to apply, some of the non-tangible things that I learned in the military in a different set, leadership, management, process development. And so I was like, I think I want to work for your dad. She just kind of laughed. She's like, well, that's for you to figure out. Like, if you can convince him to make it happen. And I should caveat, I could hear my dad in my head right now saying like you'll never do construction. I didn't have the patience to hammer nails. And so, but painting, I didn't actually mind. So that's how I found my way into it. I convinced Pop to give me a shot. He pulled me into his organization, and I was blown away. By one, how much scale, how much work they were actually doing. I think when I entered the company, we were working for 3 national home builders at that time. When I exited, we were working with, I think, 7.
So did you guys travel, or did you guys just do stuff in hometown of Florida, or did you guys go all over the U.S.?
No. Orlando and Florida is a mecca for residential construction. So this was all done in what I'll label as a very nice inconvenient circle around Orlando. So the traveling I did was just a big circle around the metropolitan area there. So that's how I found my way into paint, which then segues into My Paint Buckets. Where did that come from? So again, I'll never forget my first day on the job with Pop. It was a Monday morning. I showed up at 7:00, and he's like, "All right, here we go. Training starts today." And it was business training, really. But we sat down, and he pulls out, like, if you can picture those really like yellowish notepads with the blue lines across.
Oh yeah, I've written my fair share of estimates on those.
Yep, there you go. I was gonna say for estimates or for note taking, but he pulled it out, and he pulls out a ruler, and he starts drawing lines across, like basically making a bar, or not a bar graph, but a graph, and starts labeling Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and he's like, okay, he's like, get your paper out and start writing with me. And it was Monday, start, community lot number, start, community lot number, and I was like, oh my God, like this is bonkers. And so, because this was 2017. And so the market was rebounding at that time. Things were picking up. Orlando was a very, very hot market, especially in the Disney area. And so by, when all was said and done, we had, mind you, we'd only put maybe a third of the paint tasks on there. But we must have had 50 plus tasks written in pen. And then he started to pick up the phone and call the subcontractors and our supervisors and start to let them know, here's the stuff for the week. And so I was like, oh my God, this is crazy. So whatever, right? I, my military, just shut up, follow, learn. And after a couple, I'd say about 3 months, I was like, I have to change this up. And so the first step we did was I started to align them just with what I would call like modern technology, email. I started to put in just gentle processes. So I started to build schedules that I could just email out, daily objectives and tasks that I could email out, depending on the position or the subcontractor. And that helped, right? So it helped for about 6 months, I would say 8 months, something like that. And then it started to work. And so let me backtrack slightly. When I entered and we were just doing pen and ink, revenue, I think at that time was somewhere between 4 and 5 million. When I started to build some of these email, just by using email and just, again, those gentle processes, and emailing schedules out, things like that. It was almost overnight. We were able to take on more work. So within 6 to 9 months, we'd grown over $1 million in revenue just by, again, empowering subcontractors, supervisors, things like that. But I outgrew all that. And so, you solve one problem, you find 10 more. And so I went out there to look for software. I was like, I need software. Like, I need to be able to, not just manage a schedule, but what I needed was a schedule that allowed me to manage materials with it, to manage extra purchase orders with it. And what I started to find was there was a slew of software available, but the software tended to lean towards a very specific, I think what they say now, like on LinkedIn, is like a point software, right? Like we do scheduling, or we do material, right? Or we do whatever, extra purchase orders. And so at the end of the day, I was like, well, this doesn't help me, because the first problem was I had a mix of different types of relationships in the organization. I had W-2 employees, I had 1099 independent subcontractors, I had subcontractors, and each one of those, might operate similarly, but they also operate vastly differently when it comes to information.
Exactly. Yeah, they're people.
Exactly. There's just some that, there might be one subcontractor, for example, that had been working with us for 15 years, and I trust them to order paint at scale. There might be another one I onboarded that absolutely not. Like we haven't built that trust yet. And I'm not sure if I want to give you the ability to whatever, again, just to order materials. And so that was point one, is none of the software that I saw addressed that problem set. The second was none of them would call me back. Like when there was a standard questionnaire that they would ask, like, how big's your organization? How many, and, I knew what they were wanting to do is just how many licenses could they sell? And when I really had to break it down, I looked at the organization. I was like, well, employee wise, I might be light, but when it comes to a user perspective, I mean, I might have 100 plus people that I need to, align, and none of them would call me back because it just wasn't enough for them. And so I was like, okay, well, that makes things easy, I guess, from a perspective that it doesn't exist. I now have to go build it. So long-winded way of saying that's how I got to my paint buckets.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I mean, I'm just, as you're talking, I'm just thinking about, my time in the industry, and I'm just going, man, I completely understand all of that. My story, I took over and bought my father-in-law, very similar. My father-in-law had a painting business for, 30 years, and he was going to sell it. And I was like, well, that doesn't make any sense. And he was like, you want to buy it? But the same thing, going to work with him, legal pads, they were like, maybe 15 on the dash in his truck. One was estimate, one was like material list, one was like a job list. You just rifle through to find the right one. Yeah. I mean,
yeah,
implementing technology into this industry has been something long needed. I mean, there's still a big gap that a lot of guys don't know about it, or they're just not willing to accept it. They're still going to do the legal pad, which is understandable. But on to Paint Bucket. So currently, let's kind of jump into what you guys are doing now. So you mentioned a software launch. So you guys have a full scale, cloud-based, or how does the software set up, and what is the key demographic that you guys are looking to help?
Yeah, so awesome question. Let me start with the easy answers. We're cloud based, which is just a fancy way of saying if you've got a phone or if you've got a laptop, doesn't matter. We don't discriminate. You access us through the internet, right? Our clientele is of course new residential painters, right? That doesn't mean we cannot help a commercial painter or a residential repaint or industrial. But I also don't want to oversell, nor do I want to pretend like the problems are the same across the different variations of painters, right? And so that's at the end of the day, what we're here to do is we want to be able to help new residential painters, because as I started to sit down and look at the different problem sets from the different painters, I started to see again, like a residential repainter is their biggest problem might be leads, for example, or sales and marketing. For us in the new residential, it's speed and delivering a standard the same time every time, regardless of what subcontractor you're using. So those are the two things that above all else the national home builders want.
We did res repaint or res new construction residential for years, and that was the crux of it until that glorious housing crash, and that moved a lot of those new construction guys over into the res repaint world, which, I mean, at the heart of it, if you're going to scale, whether it's res repaint or it's new construction or it's cabinet finishing or it's commercial, if you're going to scale, efficiency is the name of the game. You've got to have SOPs. You've got to have systems. You've got to have a recreatable outcome every single time, no matter who's on the job site. So, man, I feel like at the heart of it, with proper training, I think it maybe could cross over fairly easily. I mean,
yeah, 100%. And so we purposefully like when we started, and I'll get into to your the more difficult questions, or the fun questions, I should say, with what we're doing, what did we build, I should say. But before we started to build our features, my partner and I kept that in mind, right? We said, even though we are going to be the best at new residential painters and solving their problems, there is, as you've mentioned, which is spot on, there's overlap, right? Scheduling is a good one. We were at a trade event back in July with one of the big suppliers, and in 90% of the painters we talked to were residential or repaint. And so I'll be frank, I came into that trade show with happy to talk to them. Like, it was just more or less trying to get our name and brand out there. But what I walked away with, to your point, though, they were loving the schedule. That was one of the big things. They loved the way that we blended the material into the schedule and all that. So you're absolutely correct. Is even though it works for resident or new residential, the overlap is there and could work for absolutely other different styles of painters.
What do you see the average size company really benefiting from the software?
Yeah. So again, awesome question. So we are trying to dive right into like established companies. So meaning they're probably doing over $1 million in revenue. Probably, I mean, right now, like one of our biggest clients is doing over 5 million in revenue. And it comes back to that original question, right? Like with the notepad. That, I mean, if that is probably the best way to start. There's nothing wrong with that. If you're getting started, because you got to, again, define your SOPs, define who you are. There's just a lot of other problems that are probably higher value that need to be solved than diving right into, what we do. We define ourselves as enterprise resource planning. And so what does that mean is at some point, like you're going to outgrow that notepad, you're going to outgrow an Excel spreadsheet. And that's where we want to come in. Absolutely would love to grow with someone, not to say that we're not here to help out that painter that's just getting started and we collectively grow. But again, the point there is we're here our target is someone that's already at scale and going, oh my gosh, like I don't know what to do because I've been doing it so long the same way.
What's interesting is I when you're talking about getting to that point, in the coaching that I do, trying to get guys to understand the business is a huge part of it. But what's been interesting about the painting business and curious that if you've seen the same thing is trying to think how to word this. The days of your quintessential white pants, white shirt painter running his own business, they're still there, but there's more and more entrepreneurs that have never picked up a paintbrush coming into this industry and killing it.
Yeah.
Because they understand the business side.
It's awesome perspective. And I'm in violent agreement. And here's why. I can point to an actual moment where I could see exactly what you're talking about. So going back to the trade show, we had I'm going to call them kids, and I don't think they were. That's a very an improper way to describe it.
I understand.
But they came up, and it was 2 young men, and we were talking, and my standard question is, hey, what's keeping you up at night? What are the problems you're having? And they were like, here's our problems. We need leads. That they were residential repaint, but they're like, we need leads. But we have leads, we need organization, but we have organization. The bottom line is they had been in operations for 6 months and they were already kicking ass. And so my advice to them was simply, guys, you're crushing. Like, I think my best advice to you right now is just time. Like, keep doing what you're doing. And then stay in contact.
Yeah. I mean, it's just these guys, some of them wanted to grow faster, but I bring that up because I've seen some of these guys and they're bringing these tools in. I worked for a manufacturer for a couple years and ran their sales, did on the coating side. And I would say 6 months into me being there, and they're like a lot of smaller manufacturers, boutique coatings manufacturers, which are really popping up right now. They've been in business 20 years, 15, 20 years. And 6 months into me being there, they finally and I didn't initiate it, but they brought in an ERP. Hell on earth.
Let me guess, it was designed with the benefit of a supplier or for the benefit of a supplier.
Well, I mean, it's a Canadian company and he was on the podcast. I mean, the software was great. It's just, you bring in people who have been doing it X way for 15 years, 20 years, 5 to 10 years, doesn't matter. And then you say, all right, guys, I know you've been doing it X, but that's wrong. So now I need you to do it B way. And they're like, wait a minute. We want you. I think most people go into ERPs and think, how can you make your software solve my problems? Not how are you going to adapt your software to for me individually? And it's what I have when I'm talking to people. I'm like, that's not how this works. You have to adapt how you operate to fit the software. That's the only way ERPs work. So like with that in mind, like, you know, maybe a scaled, and this is just me, my favorite term, spitballing, but if you get into some of these guys and they start with it at the beginning stages, it makes that scaling process, instead of having to like, all right, we're to this point. Now we got to come back, put this stuff in and redo everything to get to that scaling point. So like my thought is having something like this at the beginning stages, fully understand and implemented when you're building the whole system. I mean, just would be limitless in my, and I mean, just from being on that side, if I would have had something like that when I first got into the business, man, it would have been crazy. I was using, I don't know, 3 estimating software, scheduling software, invoicing, and then I had like a project board. I had different aspects of it, whether it was on-site or shop, and screens. The guys had iPads moving cards to different areas where the project was. I mean, that was a disaster.
Yeah. No, again, love it. And I think that's we're seeing a lot of it is doing this now, right? Trying to connect with the painting community, because the industry is changing. And so our hope is exactly that, is to find, those either new or old, but to answer your question, the new ones that are like, hey, like we're just getting started, but we know we're going to be growing. We're just waiting for, whatever, more leads, or we're waiting for a new contract. And so, yeah, that would be fantastic. And to your point, absolutely. Like it's refreshing to hear, adopting to the tech, like, because it's one thing that like I grossly underestimated as we've onboarded some painters, is that change management piece. And so, everything, just like the painters are learning, so are we. We initially, we'd get a lot of like, man, it'd be really nice if we just had whatever, a button that did this, or if we just had, a different color. And I'm like, okay, we're on it. And then I'm like, oh, wait a second, like, what problem are we trying to solve again? And then, exactly. So we started to find out. I'm like now I'm more aware of it. And so my point there is being like, hey, like this, like if we add a button, or before we add a button, or before we add a feature, like, I don't think this is a tech problem. I think this is an organizational problem. Have you tried, whatever, like implementing this, or this first? If yes, then I think we might have a tech gap, in which case we will explore trying to build that.
Yeah. So right now with the current software, walk me through the community, walk our listeners through, does it, estimating what the software can do, A to Z, and, kind of over big picture, but what they can expect to get out of the software if they were to say, hey, Chris, I want to try this.
Yeah, great question again. So let me start with like when I identified the problem, when I started to pull at that time my short hair out, and then what we built to alleviate that. So going back to working with Pop, once I had got my processes out there, once I knew that the processes were working, what I started to find was like interesting other problem sets. And so, for example, my phone was ringing off the hook all day from my own subcontractors and employees. And I was like, man, this is crazy. Like my phone is just nonstop. And so my father and Pop loved it. Like for him, he graded how much work was done that day by how much his phone rang. I was the opposite. I'm like, if my phone is ringing, there's something wrong. And so what I did was, it took me a week. I started to write down like who called me and what was the question. And what I started to find was, they were asked, I started to get the same questions. Where am I supposed to be? What color is the house? Where is the house? What color is the shake on ... And so that's where we started. So the first feature that My Paint Buckets built around was, we call it the cover sheet, but it's the information associated with that project. But let me backtrack slightly. We built that with respect to the relationships on a project site. So what I mean specifically is going back to, I want to take that information, I want to take my organization and all the information in it, and I want to share it to the right people. So again, if I have a subcontractor that manages 80% of my business, and I have another one that manages 10%, and then I have, two that are only doing 5% because I'm just testing them out. I want to be able to respect I want to keep some information private, right? But I also want to get that out to all of the right people. And so that's where we started, is we built in that logic to define who do you want to share that information? Is a subcontractor? If yes, who is the subcontractor? But we can go beyond that, because again, there's supervisors that also need to, drive a task to finish, for example. And so that's where we built the logic for subcontractors, supervisors, employees. We allow the painter or the business owner, I should say, to define how they want that information shared. Do they want it, narrow? Do they want it broad? And then, of course, the next piece being that cover sheet and all of the data associated with that.
Essentially, so you have roles, like users have roles.
Correct.
And then the cover sheet that you send out, there's maybe an applicator cover sheet, supervisor cover sheet, whatever. You have multiple roles, and whoever you assign that role to, when you do the cover sheet has task and information attached to it by role, and whatever role you get is the information you get. So you may not get all of it. You get what you need. Exactly.
So a subcontractor might just have access to their assigned projects, but not the total financials. A regional manager you might give them, you give them a role, but you might want them to have a little bit more. You might want them to see financials because, again, maybe a builder is behind on their extra purchase orders, and you want them to collect, right? So exactly, you nailed it. Yeah. So that's exactly. So as far as the roles go, we've got some predefined ones that we think are helpful, but the bottom line there is a painting owner has full control over how and what information that they want insert person in their organization to have. And so that's where we started. From there, we've the next step that we went into was material management. And so in new residential construction, national contracts make things challenging, especially in the Orlando area when you have 98% of the area under a national contract, regardless of what home builder you're working for. And so, like most of us good painters, right, we'd gravitate to the supplier that we knew was gonna make sure our materials were going to be out first thing in the morning. It was going to be correct, and so that was great. But what I started to find was I need a competitive advantage, right? Like I can't have my subcontractor sitting on site at 6:00 in the morning. The house is prepped, ready to go, and materials aren't there until noon because I didn't get the order in until 7:00 that morning. My fault. And so the next piece that we built in was again that material management, and what that allows us to do is now send materials directly from the platform to whoever your supplier of choice is. And so we've done that by it's done via email because we don't have direct integration into their supply systems. But the point there is it still allows me to get materials to a supplier as quickly as possible the moment I know that task is ready for paint. One of the fun rewards that we discovered in that is material theft, right? Especially in today's economy, material theft tends to ramp up. And so I started to talk to one of our clients, and I asked them, I was like, hey, like, just give me an idea. Have you had any material theft? And they laughed and like, huh. They're like, we haven't had any material theft. And they started to like, do some number crunching. And they're like, God, it's been about 15 months. I'm like,
the number
right.
signs are running above their head.
Yeah. Exactly. That meme.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he was like, yeah. And so we started, I was like, huh, it was like right about the time you started to use my paint buckets. And so, which is crazy because I mean, there's been times where, I've submitted an order and it's been, it's 6,000 square foot home. I've got $5,000 worth of materials sitting on site, and for whatever weather, let's just use weather. Crap. Well, we're not going to get to it today. Like, do your best, guys. Hide it inside. Come back the next day and it's gone. It's like, damn, man. Like, that's $5,000 gone. Like that's an immediate loss. And so to hear that was a super special data point that we found, was that for a painter in this economy to go, in this case, over 14 months without any material theft, that leads us to believe that one, that the order system works great, because two, they're ordering materials precisely when they're needed, which segues into our next feature, which is scheduling. So we've blended that.
I'm going to hit on that material ordering. Just so like when you add, like whether it's your sales rep or the store manager, you get to add your own suppliers into there and build that essentially contact with email and stuff. And then you just select it when you're ready to send it.
Exactly. As long as you've got a supplier and they have an email, it was actually super interesting. We had a client onboarded with a very small builder here in Florida, and that was our first chance. We're like, oh, here we go. We're gonna test. We finally get the test, beyond our established suppliers, and it took us about 5 minutes to add a new supplier, add their store,
awesome.
Add their materials, all that into our system. And the only hiccup that we ran into was on the supplier side. They had very tight email security. So when our order form hit their inbox, it went to junk. And so I had to walk them through how to allow that through.
So do you allow pricing inside that? So you can track material cost, like you can build a supplier list and you can edit the price per gallon, tape costs, all your sundry costs.
We do have that in there right now. We just have it turned off because most of our clients are still, the way they manage their expenses, might be monthly. And so, they might just pull their whatchamacallit, their supplier, end of month bill and do it all in one swoop. But to your point, there's a method to our madness, which is awesome. Why we also started with materials is for that reason. In order for me to get a dynamic profit and loss on each residential home that we've got going, I have to have materials next to it. I don't want it in another window, and I don't want to wait till the end of the month. And so we do have that in there. We just haven't turned off.
Okay. And then that goes into scheduling. Sorry, I didn't want to throw you off, but
no. That's dude. It's so great. Like we've always thought, like, man, are we just crazy pants? Like are the stuff that we put in here, like maybe they don't want it, but to hear you, Zach, like actually see it before we even talk about it, like it gives me a warm fuzzy inside that we're not, like I said, we're not completely off the rails on what we're trying to do here. So that's awesome. But yeah, so scheduling is that was the most recent feature that we've rolled out, and so like I said, that's why we want to pull it all together. I can't, in my opinion, I can't be a successful paint organization at scale if I can't have all of these things under a single platform, with all of the data like effortlessly flowing between those different features. And so scheduling is pretty straightforward, right? But it'll cater more towards the contracting side, the new residential side, because of those contracts. And so what we've done though with the schedule though is is we're trying to become more efficient with the materials side of things. So meaning like we've got 15 tasks or contractual tasks with a home builder. We've built in now an auto scheduling feature, meaning what we're trying to do now is go, okay, what is that delta between a start, exterior, and a pre-carpet. And then once we get that idea down, we just hit auto schedule. They'll throw down all the contractual tasks that need to be accomplished. And what we're trying to combat there is the construction manager's never-ending request of, can you just do a little? Can you just do a little? It's just a blue tape. And so now it'll flag. Like, so if it's just a blue tape, which one is it? Is it the first one? Cool, check. Like, that's on contract. But is it the fifth one? No, like we're outside of scope now. Now we need to start thinking about, we want to give painters the ability to now, like, hey, come on, like, I think we need to start talking about an extra purchase order of billable items.
So when you get into the scheduling side, is there a capability, and this is how I was taught and mentored, because it sounds like your tasks are structured towards, I'm trying to think of the word, milestones or, paint trim, paint walls. Is there an option or to go into hours, like labor hours?
Oh, so it's kind of like a timesheet?
And not necessarily like a timesheet, but let's say you go to project 1032 F Street. All right, 1032 F Street, we're doing a res repaint on the interior, or let's say we're doing an exterior. Okay, you build your supply list of what you need, and there's some guys, me being one of them, when I go to a project, I've got 80 hours on that project. I've got a 2-man, it doesn't matter. Whatever your crew size is, 80 hours divided by however many guys you've got. That's how many days it should take you to do the job. I don't care what order, like on the res repaint side, I don't care what order you do it in. What needs to be done. Here's how many hours the project's going to take. Is there a filter in there where you can say, all right, this job is blah, blah, blah. And then you can almost do the same thing, like set flags up, like, hey, you've got 80 hours on this project and there's only 8 hours left of your 80 hour, based on you're tracking it through the day or whatever metric you're using to put into the software. Is that something that you guys?
Yeah. So again, awesome. I'm smiling once again. It's like, all right, we're not crazy. Like, yes and no. And so yes is because we do have we track it by day. So we have durations built in, because that's generally, in new residential, that is just the time and the metric that they use for us. So, 2 days for an exterior or whatever, 1 day for a final. But to your point though, that is now that we've kind of got a foundation, what we want to start to do is start to collect and look at some of that data, because again, the goal here is to give painters, especially new residential, a fighting chance at the negotiating table, or when they're getting hammered by a construction manager about, you missed a day, or why wasn't this right, whatever the case may be. The friction is endless, right? And so what we've done though is we've got durations for each task, but it's the organization and whoever that they delegated the responsibility to measure the estimate versus the actual. And then we can feed that back into the system to make it smarter, right? Going back to that auto scheduling. Yeah. So if the home builder tells you, for example, the delta between the first paint task and next paint task is 10 days, but the actuals are really 17, and you've got an 80-90% confidence because the data is telling you that. Now you've got a lot of flexibility in how you can use your resources, especially in today's market where labor is extremely tight.
Yeah. And I mean, this business is completely focused on labor. So, I mean, if he's telling you it's a 10-day delta between, carpet and trim, and it's ended up being 17, I mean, that's 7 days that you could have on another project. I mean,
huge. Yeah, absolutely.
Depending on your crew size, that's a whole nother invoice that week.
Oh, and your point with efficiencies, I mean, it's spot on. Like, we're not necessarily, diving into, we've seen all of it on LinkedIn, AI and big data. Like, there is a case. I mean, we do have a use case. We do see it, But to get to that point, we have to, we can just jump right in my opinion. We have to do these little things first. We have to, for example, to your point, to talk about efficiencies, for example, materials is a good example. Like I can get my materials, we can, using my paint buckets, move faster than the supplier in most cases now, and we can move faster than home builder. That's great, but now I've got a new set of problems. For example,
exactly.
Can you tell me to the minute, or at least within 5 minutes, of when my material, like, 'cause I know my materials are out for delivery, but I don't know what time they're going to be on a job site. So if I can have a crew go do a blue tape first or a final first, because the materials aren't going to be there until noon, perfect. I gain those hours back, and I've got people working.
Yeah. What I found to be an interesting is going from, so I had my painting company in Oklahoma, and Spectrum Paint pretty much dominates that market. Great supplier, great friends. My father-in-law, who started the painting company, was like his third or fourth customer when he started. Now he's at over 110 stores in 12 states.
Yeah, I've seen them a lot. They're huge.
Yeah, I mean, he's huge. Travis is a great guy, but they've done things that I've just, until I left that market, completely took it for granted. They would, I mean, it didn't matter. It was built into their pricing. I get that. And I try to emphasize this to new distributors, because I talk to paint distributors all the time on the manufacturing side, and I've developed so many relationships with them that, if I needed 2 rolls of tape because they were that short, or a couple rolls of floor paper or masking paper, well, I could call my manager, the store manager, and be like, Jeremy, I messed up. I need 2 rolls of 1-inch blue, 3 and 1-inch blue, and I need 2 rolls of the 12-inch green paper. And he'd be like, where's it going? It's going over to that new construction job, 1032 F Street. He'll be like, driver's got this. So, probably about an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours. There's paint distributors that won't deliver orders under $150. There's paint distributors that won't deliver at all. And until I got out of that world, I'm like, I didn't even know that existed. Like, paint distributors that don't deliver. I'm like, I don't know how that works. And they were like, well, I've just never done it. And I'm like, wait, hey, tack on another $2 to every gallon and offer delivery, and watch your business increase by probably 30%.
Agreed. That's wild to hear that, because thankfully, like, the suppliers we've had the pleasure of working with, like, to your point, they've got that infrastructure built in, and so we super thankful for that. But again, it's a changing industry, right? And so that's and there's little we at My Paint Buckets have also looked at it from it's a holistic relationship, right? Like, for a painter to be successful, you've got to have a successful supplier. Like, you nailed it, right? Like, if they can't deliver, then how do you grow out of that area? You're always going to be competing for work around whatever the closest store is, right? And so that really limits you. And so we've taken that and built some features in for the supplier side as well. Now it just becomes trying to find a way to work within that large corporate structure, right? They're great. That's what, they're big for a reason. But when it comes to decisions, it's also kind of difficult when, for example, we're showing them ways to mutually grow together.
Yeah. I remember it's back 5-6 years ago, when there was, a large paint distributor who we all love to hate and hate to love. And they went to corporate arranged deliveries. So every store delivery had to be routed through essentially a broker side. And it was all based on total revenue. It was the worst thing I have ever experienced in my entire life. And I want to say it lasted, I don't know, in the Oklahoma market, it may have lasted 1.5 years. And then they were like, guys, screw this. No, we can't. I don't even know if all the markets tested that, but man, that was probably one of the worst things I ever saw. when it came to delivery.
I believe it. We've got a couple out here, and again, changing industry, but my wife, she still owns a paint company, but she tells me, she says, quote, I had to go pay my bill at the store today because I can't pay online. And when she goes in, like the phones are ringing out because it's the end of the month. And so they're literally taking calls from other business owners and taking their credit card information and just kind of, and like with the credit card machine, punching it right over the phone. I'm like, oh my gosh, like, come on, guys.
Technology is so far ahead of that, man. That's insane. So you have the scheduling side. So my question, you're doing your scheduling, you're putting your deliverables, you're putting your material in there. All that data is jiving and working. Where are we on dashboard?
So we actually just changed up our the way it looks, and so it's easier to talk through, it's easier to show. I'm happy to do, like, if you wanted to do another one, I would absolutely love to show you and your community. So if we want to set up a time,
that may be a good one to do. Just kind of run through it and understand it.
Yeah, absolutely. But what we've done is we've done two parts to it, right? What our most recent interface is we've got that cover sheet. So once again, everything's built off that. So we want to keep the important information in front of the painter and their employees or subcontractors. From there, they can shuffle between what do they want to see. So in my, logically, the way we've presented it is I need to know I need to know what task I need to do first. So the first tab is schedule. Then I need materials if I need to complete that task. And so the next tab would be materials. And then again, this is going to be more specific to new res, but then after I've completed before I start the task, hopefully, are there billable items, meaning hopefully they're, the organization's walking the house, making sure it's at that appropriate step. And if not, are there missing items? And so the last tab is EPOs. And then that tab allows them to, with a picture, with their phone, take pictures, submit the cost and submit that all the way back to whoever the contractor they're working for under. And so that's how we've kind of binned it. Now from there you can dive into more broad views of that information. So for example, if you want to see all your project, we've got a dashboard that shows, here's all of my communities and lot numbers and builders that I'm working for, and you can parse through those quickly. Once again, we're built for speed.
Yeah, any type of like an exception deal where it's saying, hey, based on the data that you've input, you got a problem in your schedule, homie. You need to come check this, this, and this. You're going to have some overlap or a gap. So it's readily available to the contractor, and they go in and be like, oh crap, I need to fill this gap. So you don't get to that
exactly
gap and be like, all right, guys, you're staying home today. I fucked up.
Yep, exactly. We have to move fast in new res. And so that's how we design the software from, going back all the way to the beginning. Once we define the relationships, once we figured out the core information that we needed to get out there, the last piece was simply, we can't get stuck, because it's easy in tech. You start to build a feature and you're like, oh my God, if I do this and this, you start to, you go down, you start chasing the white rabbit down that rabbit hole. And next thing you know, you're in Wonderland, right? And nothing, but it's not a good Wonderland because nothing's getting done. And so that's been kind of our guiding principle is when we start to see that realm of possible, we stop and go, listen, does this align with new residential industry or even a residential painter, right? That has scale. If their goal is to move fast and we have to, where do we stop the feature? Is it best to stop it here and deliver something and then see if there's a demand to go beyond that? And if so, then we'll build it. But the goal here is everything information, we have to make that as quickly accessible as possible. And so that's how our dashboards have been designed too.
So nationally right now, how many users are you guys looking at?
So you're catching us we are just now getting started. It's probably easier to look at it the sexier number is how much money are we managing for our clients and platform. So right now we're managing close to about 7 million in projects. for our clients. But again, it's just it's a handful of established painters who, they were good business owners, right? And they knew they had a problem they needed to grow beyond, or needed software to solve their problems, and in order to keep growing.
Okay. Interesting. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think it's good to, because I know you guys have been creating the software for a while, because we've been following you on LinkedIn. So how long has it been in the market?
Yeah, fun question. So I always like to go with like my Paint Buckets version 1.0 was spreadsheets, right? So like,
exactly.
But again, it's an iterative process, and so and we took all that, is like at the end of the day, like all of the stuff that I was ringing out with spreadsheets and emails and shortcut buttons, we just took and automated it. So I mean, the first line of code though we wrote in late 2018. The first where we actually like, oh my gosh, like, we're solving a problem, like, was the cover sheets and that information and those relationships that rolled out mid 2019. But again, during that time frame, like, we call it, you can call it agile. The point there is we're collecting feedback from the painters and going, where are we missing? Where are we going wrong? And iterating. So
just solving those pain points for the painters. I mean, that's the key thing.
Exactly.
And, I mean, I've always believed that ERP is just automating Excel spreadsheets and pivot tables. I mean, that's what an ERP does. It automates that, so you don't have to go build it yourself. I've built more pivot tables than I like to admit, and ERP sure does make that process a lot easier when you can just input the data and don't have to go build it.
Yep, and ERP's challenging because it comes back full circle now. Like, you solve one problem, and our goal is never to create more, but we discover more, I think, is the better way to say it. Like, cool, you helped me. Yeah, you helped me solve this. I've got my information. My phone calls, for example, were reduced by 50%. But now I start to find, like, I grew more. Now I need data, or I need whatever the case may be.
I interviewed Alex. I'm not sure if that was one of the earlier episodes. A guy named Alex. He's out of Canada. He has a company called Markoff, and they have a family-owned business, and they create ERPs for manufacturing companies in the chemical, drug, and beverage market. So everything has to be weighed, lot tracing, all that good stuff. And he and I talked a lot because he did our ERP when I was with the manufacturer, and I was the one that kind of understood and could semi speak the language of understand what he was trying to say. So I got to have a lot of meetings with Alex. So, I mean, to his point, a lot of what you're saying is what he says. It's like what they've learned over the years when they've honed in on their market is you solve a problem and it brings another one that's always been there to the forefront. It just wasn't an important problem. So
right. That's well said.
You evaluate the pain points and you put a number on it. If it's a 10, it's an immediate solve. If it's a 1 or a 2, push that thing to the back of the line. We'll get to it down the road, but it's not. And until you get those 10s, those 9s, those 7s out of the way, you don't know those 3s and 4s even exist, because this one's so prevalent. So, as the building process goes, you just get to more and more of those 3s and 4s until it's just streamlined.
Yeah, and that's well said. And painters and new res, like once again, like our why is we're sandwiched is better word, between two behemoths, right? You've got a national $1 billion home builder and you've got a national $1 billion supplier, both of which have their own processes that are there to support their efforts. And so now you're having to build build your organization in between the two, and it's difficult, right?
You're pinball. You're just bouncing back and forth between the two. Yeah.
Exactly. And so those problems, like you said, there might be an 8 or 9 or 10 level problem for a supplier that doesn't necessarily affect your builder, or vice versa. So
trying to juggle between those is, I can see that being, it is a lot. Talking to Alex, we talk about, the manufacturing side, and exactly what you say. Most ERPs benefit the supplier, or in any way, whether you're a manufacturer or you're service based, they always benefit the supplier. You know, the JIT, trying to get into that JIT inventory, just in time inventory, just doesn't really play a role into any ERP. It's very, very difficult.
Exactly. And that's what, one of our slogans that we use here and there is power to the painter, right? We've got to give the painters, especially the ones in this case they're trying to operate and trying to grow their business in between these behemoths. We have to give them something. We can't just expect them to continue to use your appropriate analogy, right, to pinball between the two, because at some point you're just going to reach a point. You're going to reach saturation in which you can't operate at scale, right? And so it's spot on.
What's interesting is from my time in the industry as on the service side, I had a buddy in Oklahoma who had a large painting. I think he had 30 guys when I sold out. And I had my biggest point, I had 12, and then it was all W2. And then I think I got down to like 8. And that was where my sweet spot was. And I, talking to him and talking to other contractors throughout the years, it seems like in this industry, you're 6 to 8, maybe 10. 10's tough because I did 12 and that was hard. Or you're in the 30s. There's really not any room to be in the middle, because the return on the labor that you're getting and the saturation of 0 qualifications or certifications to be a painter, anybody can say they're a painter. So your market cap on your rate is at a certain point that they'll just hire someone else or do it themselves. But once you get to that, like anywhere in between, like we'll call it 8 and in the 20s, mid 20s of labor, of employees, you're not making any money. Like you can run 8 guys by yourself and run a successful business as the person who takes care of, owns the business. You have, crew leaders doing that stuff, but you're doing all working on the business, not in it. But when you get to, you can't really get past 10, because then you need people working on the business for you. You need a phone caller, you need a scheduler, you need sales guys, but you can't afford sales guys until you're in the mid 20 of labor hours versus what you're making on it. So I thought that'd be interesting. There's not really and I kind of started headed that point. And I was like, I don't want to work that hard.
It's a great observation. That's I see a lot of, to your point, like you're absolutely correct. Like I see the messages, the Facebook ads running through, get started today, grow to 1 million or whatever. And it's, and that's great. Like I love the attention that the painter community is getting, but getting to 1 million, that's great. It's a absolutely huge milestone. But if you're not prepared to manage it, or go beyond that, or have the processes in place, it could also be your biggest nightmare.
Well, I tell guys a lot, and guys that I'm coaching and that I mentor in this business, in the contracting side, I'm like, my number one question, what do you want?
Yeah, good question.
I mean, what do you want? I don't care what it is. You don't have to justify it to me. You don't have to justify it to anybody. It's what you want. And then you work backwards. I mean, I read a book called 10X is Easier Than 2X by a guy named Ben Hardy.
Yeah.
Love the book. But he talks a lot, that Dan Sullivan, he talks a lot in that book about, you've got to figure out what you want, and you have to not be apologetic about it. If someone asks you why, because I want it.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. I don't have to justify anything to you. It's what I want.
Yeah.
And then work on how to get there. But I think that's a big one for painters, is they just, they say, I want to make more money. Okay. Money's a tool. What do you want? And that stumps a lot of people. I think that gets a lot of people. Makes you think about why you're in the business. But I think it's an important thing to know before you go to that next step to get to that 1 million.
100%. And that's awesome. Like, what a great question, because yeah, I mean, you could, there's a debate I've heard, you can get, is it better to get paid, $1 million, the $1 million problems are the same as whatever the $100,000 problems, right? But like the 40-hour work week, like a great book, I think it came out by Tim Ferriss back in 2004. If you strip out like a lot of what he was doing back then, one of the key concepts that I've taken with me from that book is like, break down your hourly, like how much do you want to make an hour? Or like, to your point, like how much do you want to make? Because making $10 million, but if you're spending, 12, 13 hours a day running your business, that hourly rate goes down really quick. Whereas if, you're making $1 million, but only working, a few hours because you have a tight SOP system, you've got great leadership, you're spending your time on the right things, what's better?
Yep. And then that same author makes a book, if you've read it, called Who Not How.
I've seen it. I haven't read that one.
Oh man, it's a fantastic book. I mean, just about, we are trained as individuals and just people to always figure out how to do stuff. How can I do this? How can I do that? But you will get a lot farther if you find a who that knows how to do that. Find a who, don't figure out how, because that who has already spent their years, learning how to do that. And you can have more time to do what you do and let that who do what they do.
Nailed it. Yep.
I'm just like, God, that's genius. It's a hard one to implement. It is. I've had to learn that one the hard way to implement, but it once you start, buying into it, doing it works.
Oh yeah.
Works tremendously.
Agreed.
So, well, hey, I know you've got stuff going on. I don't want to keep you too much longer, but I do want to look at doing that. Maybe we do a demo and we kind of show the software off. I would love to do that on another episode. But like, just to kind of put yourself out there to community so they know who Chris is, like, what's something that the community might find interesting about you? It's one of my favorite questions.
Oh my gosh. What would you find interesting about me, man? I'm punk rock to the core. So I think I'm starting to embrace that a lot more. I think one of my recent posts, if you've noticed, I'm trying to dive deeper into those problem sets. So I'm getting back into the paint industry. So I started my own paint company again.
I saw that.
So the goal to embrace all that is Renegade Paint. That's the name of the company. So it's and the intent there is to do things different, right? I don't know if that checks the box as being interesting.
I mean, I wouldn't have guessed punk rock. I mean, so that's pretty good. I saw that. I was going to hit on that post, and I know we're wrapping up, but what I've always found interesting on the insurance game for painters, if you're going to go the route and you're going to hire W-2, you've got to have a liability policy. You've got to have a workers' comp policy. But it doesn't matter what painting you're doing, at least in Oklahoma, where I was. Painters were always classified with roofers.
Interesting. Wow, that's really interesting, because roofing is very high liability.
Well, if you're into any type of ladder work, you're up on a 6-foot ladder on the exterior, you've got an extension ladder, you're paint and trim, the risk rate is the highest. And I could never bring that risk rate down, because it doesn't matter if I said I don't do exterior painting. Well, history shows that painters will be on a 20-foot extension in a house, or a 12-foot step, or a 16-foot step. It exists. It happens. So they put that qualification under roofers, and that rate never goes down. I swear to God, the roofer rate just always goes up. And it's something that I've got a good buddy who's real big in insurance. I've been trying to get him to, work with these companies to come up with an offset for that. Because, if you're not doing a ton of work on ladders, there should be some sort of percentage and be audited. But that was always a pain, man. The general liability and the workers' comp, just ridiculous.
Yeah, man, that's crazy that I get it. I see the logic, I should say, as to why they do that. But man, yeah, I mean, that's a whole nother conversation, because like that ties into, now the pricing model. And some of the friction that the painters now face with the national home builders, because Risk keeps doing this, but the pricing that they want to pay keeps doing this, maybe like this. So
yeah, they're always wanting to pay less. Paint's always the first thing anyone sees, but the last thing anyone thinks about.
It's so scrutinized. God, again, Zach, well said, man. That exactly.
I mean, you'll upgrade the wiring in your house. You'll upgrade the plumbing in your house. You'll upgrade the framing in your house. One says it'll last longer. No one ever sees it. But you'll blow every budget dollar and want to cut every corner when it comes to paint. But that's the only thing anyone sees when they walk in the door is the finish. It's mind blowing. Shoot out your socials so everybody can get out there and follow you and check out the software.
Yep. If you're on LinkedIn, My Paint Buckets, 3 words, that'll pop up on LinkedIn. We're also on Facebook. Same thing, My Paint Buckets, 3 separate words. But yeah, or you can just feel free to find me and connect with me. Always happy to connect with anyone in the industry. I've got links on my page, so we're all pointing to the same spot.
Awesome. Chris, man, I appreciate you coming on. Great conversation. Let's talk offline a little bit and get on the calendar to do a demo. I think that would be really good.
Awesome. Zach, thank you for having us and absolutely love what you're doing, man. This is awesome.
Oh man, I appreciate it. Having a lot of fun. Everybody, thank you for listening. Make sure you subscribe. Make sure you're following us on YouTube to get those video versions, and we'll see you next week.
And that's a wrap on this episode of the Bearded Finisher Podcast. We thank everyone for joining. Keep hustling, keep learning, and never settle for anything less than your best. Remember, the path to perfection is a journey, not a destination. Until next time.